Save the ammo, princess. Every bullet costs more than your paycheck. The words cut through the morning air at NATO's ballistics testing range like a blade, sharp, cold, meant to draw blood without leaving a mark. Colonel Victor Kane stood at the edge of the firing line, arms crossed, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes spreading across his weathered face. Behind him, 40 soldiers and 5 officers watched from the observation deck, their laughter rolling across the concrete like thunder before a storm. The sun had barely cleared the horizon, casting long shadows across the range, and already the day felt heavy with something unspoken. Lieutenant Harper Drax didn't flinch. She stood 5 feet 4 inches in boots that had seen better days, wearing a gray cotton shirt that hung loose over cargo pants. No body armor, no tactical vest, just a clipboard tucked under one arm and a tablet in her left hand. Her brown hair was pulled back in a regulation bun so tight it could have been painted on. Wire-rimmed titanium glasses caught the early light, hiding eyes that tracked Kane with the precision of a targeting system. She didn't respond to his comment, didn't smile, didn't bristle, didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. She simply turned toward the equipment table where the M110 SAS rifle waited, its matte black finish drinking in the dawn. Kane's voice rose again, louder this time, playing to the crowd. 2,000 meters, that's sniper distance. You can barely hold the rifle. More laughter. Someone in the back whistled. Another voice called out something about paper pushers pretending to be operators, and the pack mentality took hold. 40 people feeding off each other's contempt like kindling catching fire. Harper set her tablet down on the table with a soft click that somehow cut through the noise. She reached for the rifle, and that's when Master Chief Owen Reeves, standing near the front of the observation deck, felt something shift in his chest. He'd been to 17 combat zones across 3 decades. He'd trained hundreds of recruits, watched thousands of people handle weapons, and he knew, with the certainty that comes from repetition and survival, when someone moved like they'd forgotten more about killing than most people would ever learn. Harper's grip was wrong for an analyst. Her index finger lay parallel to the barrel, not curled near the trigger guard the way nervous shooters positioned themselves. Her thumb rested along the receiver with the kind of casual authority that spoke of muscle memory worn into bone. She didn't check the chamber with the jerky movements of someone following a checklist. She did it the way you breathe, necessary, automatic, invisible unless you knew what to look for. Owen's eyes narrowed. His hand moved unconsciously toward the brim of his cover, almost a salute, then stopped. Something wasn't right. Or maybe something was exactly right, and everyone else was too busy laughing to notice. Kane stepped closer, his boots crunching on gravel that had been swept clean an hour before the demonstration began. I'll make you a deal, Lieutenant. Hit center mass at 2,000 meters and I'll buy you coffee for a month. Miss, and you pack your desk. He paused, letting the words settle like sediment. We don't have time for tourists playing soldier. Harper finally looked at him. Not up, she was too short for that, but directly, the way you look at a math problem you've already solved but have to show your work for anyway. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, barely above the whisper of wind moving across open ground. Then you'd better start counting. The observation deck went silent for half a heartbeat, then erupted again. Someone started filming on their phone. Someone else opened a betting pool. 20 euros said she'd miss by 300 meters. 50 said she wouldn't even fire. 100 said Kane would pull the plug before she embarrassed herself. The energy was electric, vicious, the kind of collective cruelty that groups inflict when they smell weakness and mistake silence for surrender. Harper ignored all of it. She moved to the firing position, a sandbagged platform elevated 18 inches off the ground with a clear line of sight down the range. The target sat 2,000 meters away, a steel plate 4 feet across, painted white with a red circle in the center the size of a dinner plate. At that distance, it looked like a postage stamp balanced on the edge of the world. Wind moved through the valley in unpredictable gusts, carrying the smell of pine resin and diesel fuel from the motor pool half a click north. Humidity sat at 72%. Barometric pressure was dropping. Temperature was climbing fast as the sun burned off the morning chill. Every variable mattered. Every calculation had to be perfect. Kane watched her settle into position, his satisfaction almost palpable. He'd already won, in his mind. The wind reading tools mounted at intervals along the range had been adjusted 15% off their true calibration. A sabotage so subtle it would look like equipment drift, easily blamed on maintenance schedules and budget cuts. No one would question it. No one would know. And when Harper missed, when she failed publicly and spectacularly, It would confirm what Kane had been saying for weeks. Analysts belonged behind desks, not on ranges, and anyone who thought otherwise was wasting NATO's time and money. What Kane didn't see, what he couldn't see, because he'd stopped looking the moment he decided Harper wasn't worth his attention, was the way she positioned her tablet beside the rifle, angled so the screen was visible only to her. Her fingers moved across the glass surface in a pattern too quick and too precise to be casual. Code scrolled in dark green text against a black background. Data populated in real time. Wind speed corrected to true value. Air density calculated from satellite feeds. Coriolis effect adjusted for latitude and bearing. The system was running diagnostics faster than any human could process, cross-referencing ballistic coefficients and environmental factors with algorithms designed to eliminate guesswork from long-range engagement. She didn't use Kane's wind gauges. She didn't need them. Owen Reeves moved closer to the observation deck railing, his instincts screaming at him to pay attention. Harper's breathing had changed. 4 seconds in through her nose, held for 4 seconds. Out through her mouth for 4 seconds. Pause for 4 seconds. Repeat. Combat breathing. The kind special operations taught to keep your heart rate below 120 beats per minute when everything in your body wanted to spike into panic mode. He'd seen it 1,000 times. He'd taught it himself, but he'd never seen an analyst use it. Not naturally, not without thinking about it, not like it was just another part of getting ready to pull a trigger. Harper's right hand moved to her forearm, adjusting her sleeve where it had bunched slightly near her elbow. For just a moment, less than a second, barely noticeable unless you were watching for it, Owen caught a glimpse of scar tissue. Not the clean lines of surgical repair, but the chaotic pattern of thermal damage. Skin that had melted and reformed in ways that spoke of heat and pressure and proximity to something that should have killed her. The scar disappeared back under fabric before he could process the shape, but the image burned into his memory like a photograph, whirls and spirals, mathematical and organic at the same time, the kind of pattern you got when metal and flesh met at temperatures high enough to rewrite molecular structure. Harper chambered around. The sound was clean, mechanical, absolute. She settled her cheek against the stock, adjusted her position by millimeters, breathed. The range fell into a waiting silence, the kind that stretches time and compresses it simultaneously. Even the wind seemed to pause. If you think a princess can't pull a trigger, hit that like button and watch what happens when underestimation meets precision. Subscribe. This shot changes everything. The countdown began. Someone on the observation deck shouted, 5, and the crowd picked it up, their voices overlapping and building. 4, 3, 2, 1. Harper squeezed the trigger. The rifle barked once, a sharp crack that echoed off the mountains flanking the valley and rolled back over the range in diminishing waves. The recoil pushed into her shoulder. She absorbed it without moving, without adjusting, her body a fixed point in space that the weapon moved around rather than through. Smoke curled from the muzzle, thin and gray, dissipating almost immediately in the morning breeze. Then silence. Complete, absolute, breath-holding silence while 40 people and 6 officers waited for the spotting scope confirmation. 2.3 seconds later, the steel target rang like a bell. The spotter's voice came through the radio system, flat and professional and utterly neutral. Center mass, direct hit. The observation deck didn't erupt this time. It froze. 40 people processing information their brains told them couldn't be accurate, their worldview tilting just slightly off its axis. Kane's smile stayed fixed on his face for another second, then cracked like old paint. He turned toward the electronic tracking system mounted on the wall behind the firing line, a bank of monitors that displayed bullet trajectory, wind compensation, point of impact, shooter identification, and equipment authorization codes. The main screen should have shown Lieutenant H. Drax, Analyst Division, Equipment Authorization, Alpha 7-9er, Standard Protocol, Standard Display, Standard Confirmation that everything about the shot was logged, recorded, and filed for after-action review. Instead, the screen flickered. Lines of red text began scrolling faster than anyone could read, interspersed with warning symbols that flashed and disappeared and reappeared in different configurations. The system was trying to identify the shooter based on ballistic signature, the unique pattern of how the rifle was handled, how the trigger was pulled, how the recoil was managed. Every shooter left a fingerprint in the data, as distinctive as DNA. But the system couldn't match Harper's pattern to her file. It couldn't match it to anyone's file. The algorithm was reaching deeper into NATO's database, pulling clearance levels that required authorization codes most of the people in the room didn't know existed. Kane crossed the distance to the monitor in 6 long strides, his boots hitting concrete hard enough to echo. "What is this?" His voice had lost its casual cruelty, replaced with something sharper and more dangerous. Control slipping, questions forming, the beginning of calculations about exposure and consequences, and how to contain a situation that was spiraling into territory he couldn't afford to let anyone explore. The tracking system locked onto a designation. The screen went black for half a second, then displayed a single line in red letters 2 inches high. Error, unauthorized access, tracing source. Harper remained in position, rifle still shouldered, breathing still controlled, tablet still active beside her showing code that continued to run in patterns only she understood. She didn't turn around, didn't offer explanation, didn't move except for the slow, measured rise and fall of her ribcage as she maintained her 4-count breathing cycle. Owen Reeves felt his pulse accelerate for the first time in 15 years outside of active combat. His hand moved to his sidearm, not drawing it but confirming its presence, the weight of it suddenly important in ways he couldn't articulate. His eyes tracked between Harper's position and Kane's back, watching the colonel's shoulders tense beneath his uniform, watching the way his right hand curled into a fist and then relaxed, watching the micro-expressions of someone making decisions in real time about how to play a hand that had just been dealt from a deck he didn't know existed. The radio crackled, a new voice, older, carrying the kind of authority that made junior officers stand straighter even when the speaker wasn't in the room. "Range officer, this is Admiral Harker. Hold all positions. I'm reviewing the drone feed now." Pause. Static. Wind across an open microphone somewhere in the war room 300 meters away in the command building. "Lieutenant Drax, identify your device." Harper finally moved. She lifted her cheek from the rifle stock, engaged the safety with a click that seemed louder than the gunshot, and stood. When she turned toward the observation deck, her expression was completely neutral, not defiant, not afraid, not triumphant, just present, existing in the moment without commentary or emotion, the way you exist when you've been waiting for something inevitable and it finally arrives. She picked up her tablet, held it so the screen faced the nearest camera mounted on the observation deck railing. Code continued to scroll. The camera auto-focused, transmitted the image back to the war room where Admiral Lewis Harker sat surrounded by intelligence analysts and tactical officers who'd been monitoring the demonstration as routine training evaluation. What they saw on their screens made 2 of them stand up so fast, their chairs fell backward. Harper's voice carried across the range, quiet but clear, every word enunciated with the precision of someone who'd practiced this moment in her mind 1,000 times. "Apex Protocol, sir. Ballistics AI developed Geneva 2021. 3 seconds of silence. Then Harker's voice again, slower now, each word weighted. "Geneva was destroyed. All personnel killed in action." Kane moved, not toward Harper but toward the door that led from the range to the equipment storage area, his stride lengthening, his hand already reaching for his phone. Owen Reeves intercepted him with a single step to the left, not blocking the path but occupying space in a way that forced Kane to acknowledge his presence and make a choice about whether to escalate physically. Kane stopped. His eyes met Owen's, and something passed between them. Recognition, calculation, understanding that lines were being drawn and positions were being taken, and the next 60 seconds would determine which side of those lines everyone ended up on. "Let me through, Master Chief." Kane's voice was level, controlled, but tension ran underneath it like current through a live wire. Owen didn't move. "Sir, Admiral Harker gave an order to hold positions. I'm not part of this demonstration. You're on this range. That makes you part of whatever this is." Kane's jaw tightened. His hand stayed near his phone. His eyes flicked past Owen to Harper, who remained standing beside the firing position, tablet in hand, waiting. The observation deck had gone completely silent now, 40 people holding their collective breath, phones still recording but forgotten, the betting pool irrelevant, the jokes dried up and blown away like dust. Harker's voice cut through the tension again. "Colonel Kane, return to your position. Lieutenant Drax, you will remain on the firing line. No one leaves this range until I arrive." Pause. "Master Chief Reeves, you're in command of security until I get there. Anyone tries to leave, you have authorization to detain them." Owen's hand moved to his sidearm, not drawing it, just confirming. "Copy that, Admiral. Range is locked down." Kane turned slowly, his face a careful mask of professional courtesy that didn't quite hide the calculations happening behind his eyes. He walked back to the observation deck, positioned himself near the railing, and waited. His phone stayed in his pocket, but his thumb pressed against the power button through the fabric. Once, twice, 3 times. A signal. A warning. A command to systems elsewhere that something had gone wrong and protocols needed to be activated. Harper saw it. She didn't react, didn't acknowledge, but she saw it the way you see movement in peripheral vision, the way your brain registers threat before your conscious mind processes the information. Her thumb moved across her tablet screen in a pattern that looked casual, scrolling through data, reviewing calculations, normal post-shot analysis. But beneath the surface interface, code executed. Firewalls activated. Trace programs launched. Data streams that had been dormant for 4 years suddenly came online, reaching into NATO's network like roots growing through concrete, finding pathways that shouldn't exist and exploiting them with the efficiency of architecture designed by someone who'd built the original system and knew where all the hidden doors were located. The tracking monitor flickered again. The error message disappeared, replaced by a new screen that made Kane's carefully controlled expression crack for just a moment. Half a second of pure recognition before he caught himself and rebuilt the mask. But half a second was enough. Owen saw it. 3 other veterans on the observation deck saw it. And somewhere in the war room, Admiral Harker saw it through drone cameras that captured everything in 4K resolution and filed it away for analysis and replay and eventual use in proceedings that would determine careers and convictions and the next decade of several people's lives. The new screen displayed a designation code. AXP Delta 17. Below it, a timestamp. 2021, March 15th, 03:42 hours. Below that, a location. Geneva Research Facility, Ballistics Development Division. And below that, a status that blinked slowly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. Protocol active. Someone on the observation deck whispered, "What does that mean?" No one answered. Because the people who knew what it meant were too busy processing implications and consequences, and the sudden realization that everything they thought they understood about the last 4 years was built on a foundation that had just been revealed as smoke and mirrors and carefully maintained lies. Harper set her tablet down on the equipment table. She reached for her right sleeve, the one that had bunched earlier, and rolled it up slowly, deliberately, giving everyone time to see what had been hidden. The scar tissue emerged inch by inch. Not a simple burn, but a pattern so specific and so distinctive that anyone who'd worked in chemical engineering or weapons development or high-energy research would recognize it immediately. The whorls and spirals weren't random, they were mathematical. A Fibonacci sequence rendered in damaged flesh, the signature left when superheated copper and molten steel met human skin during a laboratory explosion that reached temperatures high enough to vaporize equipment and leave molecular-level impressions on anyone close enough to survive. Owen Reeves felt his breath catch. He'd read the reports from Geneva. Everyone in NATO intelligence had read them. A gas leak, they'd said. Faulty ventilation. 6 scientists dead, the research facility destroyed. The Apex protocol, the most advanced ballistics AI ever developed, capable of calculating trajectories that made 2,000-meter shots as reliable as target practice at 50 feet. Lost forever in the fire. Accident. Tragedy. Investigation closed. Case filed away. Move on. But accidents didn't leave Fibonacci burns. Gas leaks didn't create spiral patterns that matched the crystallization structure of copper-titanium alloys under extreme thermal stress. And protocols didn't spontaneously activate 4 years after they'd been declared dead, unless someone had been maintaining them, updating them, keeping them alive in the dark while pretending to be something they weren't. Harper looked directly at the camera transmitting to the war room. "I wore their contempt like armor, sir. Every insult, every doubt, every joke about princesses and bullets and paychecks." She paused, her voice dropping half an octave, losing the flatness and gaining something harder. "I needed them to believe I was weak, because weak people don't get investigated. Weak people don't get noticed. Weak people can work for 4 years without anyone asking why an analyst who barely qualifies for basic training keeps volunteering for ballistics evaluation duty at remote testing ranges where network security is just loose enough to let certain code run without triggering immediate alarms." Kane's mask shattered. "You..." He took a step forward, caught himself, forced control back into his voice. "You were dead." "I was convenient, Colonel." Harper's tone remained level, clinical, the way you describe experimental results in a peer-reviewed journal. Dead people don't testify. Dead people don't have access logs. Dead people don't spend 4 years tracking every line of code that got extracted from Geneva 72 hours before the explosion, watching it show up in private sector projects under different names with sanitized documentation and venture capital funding that came from accounts buried behind so many shell corporations that even NATO's forensic accountants couldn't trace them. She picked up her tablet again, tapped the screen twice. But the code knows where it came from. Code has a signature. And when you forced my hand today by sabotaging the wind gauges, which I noticed, by the way, excellent work on making it look like calibration drift, you made me use Apex publicly. You couldn't resist checking if it was real. And the moment you touched that tracking screen, the system logged your access credentials, again, just like it did 4 years ago when you authorized the file transfer to Vortex AIM. The observation deck erupted. Not with laughter this time, but with shock and confusion and the rapid-fire whispers of people trying to process information that came too fast and contradicted too much of what they thought they knew. 3 officers immediately moved toward Kane, not hostile, but present, bracketing him in the way security details bracket subjects who've transitioned from respected superior to potential flight risk. Kane didn't move. He stood perfectly still, his mind clearly racing through options and finding very few that ended anywhere except exactly where this was headed. A diesel engine rumbled in the distance, growing louder. Admiral Harker was en route, probably with MPs and legal officers and enough recording equipment to document everything that happened next in admissible detail. The sun had climbed higher now, burning off the last of the morning chill, turning the range into a stage where every shadow was visible and every expression could be read and nothing could be hidden anymore. Harper glanced at Owen Reeves. Their eyes met for just a moment, veteran to veteran, operator to operator, recognition passing between them without words. Owen nodded once, slight but definite. Acknowledgement, respect. Understanding that whatever happened next, she'd earned her place on this range and in this fight, and anyone who said otherwise could take it up with the 2,000-meter target that still had a bullet hole dead center where physics and skill and 4 years of patient calculation had put it. The rifle remained on the equipment table, safety engaged, barrel pointed downrange, exactly where regulations required it to be. Smoke had long since dissipated. The spent casing lay where it had ejected, glinting in the sunlight, a small piece of brass worth more than its weight in gold because of what it proved and what it represented and where it would eventually end up, logged as evidence, photographed from 17 angles, measured and analyzed and filed away as the physical manifestation of the moment everything changed. What just triggered that system? Drop your theory in the comments, and don't miss part 2 where the real identity drops. Hit subscribe so you don't lose this story. Admiral Harker's vehicle pulled onto the range, tires crunching on gravel, engine cutting off with a diesel clatter that echoed once and faded. The door opened. A man in his early 60s emerged, wearing khakis and a polo shirt that somehow carried more authority than most dress uniforms. His gray hair cut military short, his eyes scanning the scene with the kind of comprehensive awareness that comes from decades of intelligence work and threat assessment. 2 MPs followed him out, hands near their sidearms but not on them, ready, professional, present. Harker walked directly to Harper. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough for private conversation, but distant enough that the cameras caught everything. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, controlled, the tone of someone who'd already reviewed footage and made preliminary decisions but needed confirmation before proceeding. Lieutenant Drax, or should I use your former designation? Lieutenant is fine, sir. Harper's posture shifted slightly. Not to attention, but closer to it, acknowledging rank and chain of command, while still maintaining the careful neutrality of someone who knew they were being recorded and evaluated and judged by standards that would be debated for months. Harker nodded. Walk me through it. Short version. We'll do the long version with lawyers present. Harper glanced at Kane, then back to Harker. The short version is that Colonel Kane sabotaged this demonstration to discredit me before I could discredit him. The long version is that he's been running a parallel operation for 4 years, selling Apex derivatives to private contractors while covering his tracks with enough misdirection that no one looked too closely at why a ballistics analyst kept volunteering for remote range duty. She paused. I survived Geneva because I was in the isolation testing chamber when the primary lab detonated. I don't know if Kane ordered the explosion or if one of his partners did, but the code transfer happened 72 hours prior. and the only person with authorization to extract classified AI protocols from a NATO facility was the commanding officer. That was Kane. Harker's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes, confirmation, probably, of intelligence assessments that had been building for months or years, pieces of a puzzle that suddenly snapped into focus because someone had provided the keystone. You've been investigating him for 4 years, while pretending to be exactly what I am, sir, a ballistics analyst. The cover was real. The weakness was performance art. Harper's voice dropped again, losing the clinical edge and gaining something that might have been exhaustion or might have been relief or might have been both. Strength isn't noise. It's discipline when no one is clapping. Harker absorbed that, processed it, filed it away. He turned to Kane, who remained standing near the observation deck railing, surrounded by 3 officers who'd somehow transitioned from colleagues to guards without anyone giving explicit orders. Colonel Kane, you're relieved of duty pending investigation. MPs will escort you to headquarters. You have the right to legal representation. I strongly suggest you exercise that right. Kane finally moved, not dramatically, not with protest or denial, just a small shift of weight that said he'd reached the point where resistance would cost more than compliance. This is nonsense, Admiral. That woman has provided enough preliminary evidence to justify a full audit of your activities over the past 4 years. Harker's voice remained level, but steel ran underneath it now, including the Vortex AIM contracts, including the Geneva incident, including every ballistics consultation you've billed as NATO business while the intellectual property ended up in private sector applications. He nodded to the MPs. Escort the colonel to headquarters. Standard protocol. The MPs moved in, professional and efficient, no drama, no handcuffs yet because Kane hadn't resisted and hadn't been formally charged. But the message was clear. This wasn't a request, wasn't a conversation, wasn't anything except the first step in a process that would take months and involve investigations and hearings and probably trials. Kane walked between them, his back straight, his face carefully neutral, a man who'd gambled everything on a hand and lost, but refused to show it until the cards were officially turned over and the chips counted, and the dealer called the game. The vehicle doors closed. The engine started. Gravel crunched. The sound faded into distance. 40 people on the observation deck still hadn't moved. They stood frozen in the awkward silence that follows revelation, when everything you thought you knew has been revealed as incomplete or inaccurate or deliberately misleading, and you're left processing implications and wondering what else you missed and how you're supposed to act now that the truth has been spoken and can't be unspoken. Harper remained beside the equipment table, tablet in hand, scar visible on her forearm, breathing still controlled in that 4-count rhythm. Harker stood 3 feet away, hands in his pockets, looking like someone's grandfather except for the eyes that never stopped analyzing and the posture that never quite relaxed. Between them hung the weight of 4 years of deception and investigation and patience, the kind of operation that required absolute commitment and zero margin for error because one mistake would have blown everything and gotten Harper killed or disappeared or discredited beyond recovery. Owen Reeves finally broke the silence. Permission to speak, Admiral. Harker nodded. That was the finest shot I've seen in 30 years, ma'am. Owen looked at Harper directly, respect evident in every line of his weathered face. And the worst undercover performance I've ever witnessed because no analyst moves like that, breathes like that, or carries themselves like someone who's forgotten more about combat than most people will ever learn. He paused. Which means you wanted us to notice, eventually, when it mattered. Harper allowed herself a small smile, the first expression beyond neutral she'd shown since arriving at the range. I kept quiet so the wrong man would speak, Master Chief. But I needed witnesses when he did. The observation deck began to stir, people whispering to each other, phones coming back out, betting pools forgotten. The entire narrative of the morning rewritten from analyst fails to operator exposes corruption in the span of 15 minutes. The story would spread fast, through NATO, through contractor networks, through the complex web of military and civilian relationships that governed how information moved and how reputations were built or destroyed. By lunch, everyone on the base would know. By dinner, the details would be distorted beyond recognition. By tomorrow, there would be official statements and damage control and carefully worded press releases that said everything and nothing. But right now, in this moment, on this range with the sun climbing toward noon and the target still standing 2,000 meters downrange with a bullet hole that would probably never be repaired because someone in public affairs would decide it made good symbolism, the truth was simple and clear and undeniable. Harper Drax had spent 4 years wearing weakness like a disguise. She'd endured mockery and contempt and casual cruelty from people who never looked past surface appearances. She'd calculated every move, every response, every moment of silence, building a case brick by brick and line of code by line of code, waiting for the perfect opportunity to make the reveal impossible to deny and the evidence impossible to dismiss. And when Kane gave her that opportunity, when he sabotaged the wind gauges and mocked her in front of 40 witnesses and forced her to use Apex publicly, she'd taken her shot. 1 bullet, 2,000 meters, center mass, perfect execution. And in doing so, she'd blown open an investigation that would probably take down a dozen people and expose networks that reached into private industry and foreign governments and the shadowy spaces where classified technology became profitable venture capital investments. Justice wasn't loud, it was patient. And today, patience had paid off in copper and lead and mathematics and 4 years of discipline that most people would never have the strength to maintain. Harker pulled his hand from his pocket, extended it toward Harper. "Welcome back, Dr. Drax. We have a lot to discuss." Harper shook his hand once, firm and brief. "Yes, sir, we do." The range began to clear. Officers filing off the observation deck, soldiers dispersing to morning assignments, the machinery of military bureaucracy grinding back into motion now that the immediate drama had concluded. Owen Reeves remained, standing near the firing line, watching Harper pack her tablet and her equipment with the kind of careful precision that marked every action she took. The rifle went back in its case, the spent brass went into an evidence bag, the tablet powered down. And Lieutenant Harper Drax, ballistics analyst, Apex protocol architect, survivor of Geneva, architect of one of the longest and most patient investigations in NATO history, walked off the range with her head up and her shoulders back and nothing left to hide. The walk from the range to NATO headquarters took 7 minutes. Harper didn't speak during those 7 minutes. Neither did Admiral Harker, who walked beside her with the steady gait of someone conserving energy for battles that hadn't started yet. 2 MPs followed at a discreet distance, close enough to respond but far enough to maintain the illusion that this was a conversation between colleagues rather than the opening movement of something larger and more dangerous. The morning had shifted from cool to warm, the kind of temperature change that happens fast in mountain valleys, when the sun clears the peaks and starts working on the shadows. Dust hung in the air, kicked up by vehicle traffic between buildings that all looked the same, concrete and steel and efficiency, function over form, NATO standard issue architecture. They entered through the east entrance, bypassed the main security checkpoint with a nod from Harker that made the guards step aside without question, and took the stairs instead of the elevator. 3 flights up. Harper's breathing remained controlled, that same 4-count rhythm she'd maintained on the range. Automatic now, wired so deep into her nervous system that stress couldn't disrupt it. Harker noticed, filed it away, said nothing. The war room occupied the entire 3rd floor of the command building. 20 workstations arranged in concentric circles around a central display wall that could show anything from satellite feeds to financial transactions to the kind of classified intelligence that existed in databases most countries didn't know NATO maintained. Right now, the display showed the ballistics range from 6 different camera angles, frozen at the moment Harper's bullet struck center mass. Timestamp visible in the corner, 0617 and 34 seconds. Temperature, wind speed, humidity, all the variables that should have made the shot impossible for anyone except someone who had access to computational tools that weren't supposed to exist anymore. Harker gestured toward a workstation near the center. "Sit, we have approximately 40 minutes before legal arrives, and this becomes formal." He pulled up a chair across from her, close enough that their conversation would stay private despite the dozen analysts working at nearby stations. "Tell me about Geneva, the real version, not the report we filed." Harper set her tablet on the desk, screen down, buying herself 3 seconds to decide how much truth could be spoken and how much needed to stay buried for reasons that had nothing to do with this investigation and everything to do with operations that were still active in places she couldn't name. The explosion wasn't an accident, we both know that. What you might not know is that the gas leak story was my idea. Harker's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Explain." The Apex protocol wasn't just ballistics AI, it was predictive engagement software that could calculate trajectories 18 seconds into the future based on target behavior patterns and environmental probability matrices. Harper's voice dropped lower, forcing Harker to lean in, which meant it could do more than help snipers hit targets. It could predict where targets would move before they moved, naval applications, drone swarms, automated defense systems that didn't need human confirmation before engaging. And someone wanted that capability outside NATO control. Multiple someones. Kane was just the access point. The Vortex AIM project had funding from at least 3 different venture capital groups, all of them fronts for foreign intelligence services or private military contractors operating in regions where international law gets flexible. Harper pulled her tablet back toward her, powered it on, began pulling up files that appeared on the war room's main display automatically. Synchronized, seamless, like the system recognized her authority even though she'd been officially dead for 4 years. I realized the leak was happening about a week before the explosion. Code fragments showing up in places they shouldn't. Access logs from terminals that should have been isolated. Someone was bleeding Apex into external servers. Harker watched the files populate on screen. Financial transactions, communications logs, travel records. A web of connections spreading across continents, linking shell corporations to research facilities to accounts and jurisdictions that specialized in making money disappear. You could have reported it. To who? Kane was my commanding officer. His authorization level meant he could access almost everything I flagged as suspicious and sanitize it before it reached anyone else. Harper's fingers moved across the tablet, pulling up more data. So I made a choice. I documented everything, encrypted it, and waited. When the lab detonated, I was in the isolation chamber running thermal stress tests on copper alloys. The explosion killed everyone in the primary research bay, 6 people, all of them friends, all of them colleagues who trusted me, and gave me exactly one option: stay dead and build a case, or survive publicly and watch Kane bury the evidence along with everyone who might have helped me prove it. The war room had gone quiet. Not completely. Keyboards still clicked, monitors still hummed, the background noise of intelligence work continued. But the analysts within earshot had stopped pretending they weren't listening. This was history being made, testimony that would be dissected and analyzed and quoted in classified briefings for the next decade. Harker felt the weight of it, the responsibility of being the person who had to decide what happened next, and for just a moment he looked every one of his 62 years. "You wore their contempt like armor," he said, repeating Harper's phrase from the range. "Every insult, every joke, every dismissal." Harper met his eyes directly, and Harker saw something there that made him understand why Kane had never suspected her, why no one had looked past the surface and seen what was underneath. She'd made herself invisible not by hiding, but by becoming exactly what people expected to see. Small, quiet, competent, but not threatening. The kind of analyst who did good work and never made waves and could be safely ignored when more important things demanded attention. I needed Kane to believe I was weak, because weak people don't get investigated. They don't get monitored. They don't trigger the kind of scrutiny that would have exposed what I was really doing, rebuilding Apex piece by piece in isolated code fragments, tracking every derivative that showed up in Vortex AIM applications, documenting 4 years of theft and corruption and criminal negligence that got 6 people killed. Harker leaned back in his chair, processed what he'd heard, ran calculations about implications and consequences and how this would play out in courts and committees and the shadowy spaces where NATO made decisions that never appeared in public record. The wind gauges. You knew Kane would sabotage them. I knew he'd do something. He's been trying to discredit me for 8 months, ever since I started volunteering for every ballistics evaluation at remote testing facilities. He thought I was incompetent. I let him think that. But I also knew that eventually he'd push hard enough to give me an opening, force me to demonstrate capability publicly, in front of witnesses, in a way that would trigger Apex and make the system log his access credentials when he inevitably checked to see if the protocol was real. You baited him. I gave him rope. He chose to hang himself with it. The display wall flickered. New data populated, real-time traces running through NATO's network, following digital breadcrumbs that Harper had apparently been leaving for years, hidden in routine maintenance logs and system diagnostics and the kind of background noise that security protocols filtered out as irrelevant. Except it wasn't irrelevant. It was a map, a comprehensive record of every time Kane had accessed classified files, Every transfer he'd authorized to external servers, every communication with Vortex AIM personnel that violated about 40 different regulations and at least a dozen laws spanning multiple countries. One of the analysts at a nearby workstation spoke up, his voice uncertain. "Admiral, we're getting flags from network security. Someone's running deep trace protocols through our servers. The system identifies the source as..." He paused, checked his screen again, confusion evident in every line of his posture. "As Lieutenant Drax's tablet, but the authorization codes are above my clearance level. I can't shut it down." "Don't try," Harker said. He looked at Harper. "How much access do you have?" "Enough to finish what I started." Kane made a mistake when he sabotaged the demonstration. He thought discrediting me would end the problem. What he actually did was give me legal justification to deploy Apex publicly, which means every action I take from this point forward is defensive response to an active security threat rather than unauthorized intrusion into classified systems. Harper's fingers continued to move across her tablet. He also made a second mistake. When he reached for his phone after the Apex designation appeared on screen, he triggered a wipe protocol for Vortex AIM servers. Standard procedure. If the operation is compromised, destroy the evidence before authorities can secure it, except I've been monitoring those servers for 18 months. The moment the wipe command executed, my system logged the source location and started copying everything it could reach before the data disappeared. Harker stood, moved to the main display, watched code execute in real time across multiple windows that showed file transfers happening faster than human comprehension could follow. Terabytes of data flowing from external servers into NATO archives, encrypted and time-stamped and logged with chain of custody documentation that would hold up in any court on the planet. How long before the wipe completes? Harper checked her tablet. 26 minutes. But Kane's protocol is only erasing the primary servers. The backup system is physically isolated, different location, different network, manual activation required. If we want everything, we need to find that location and secure it before Kane's partners realize the main servers are compromised and trigger a secondary wipe. Do you know where the backup is located? I have 3 probable locations based on power consumption patterns, network topology, and financial transactions that correlate with server maintenance costs. Harper pulled up a map on the display wall. 3 red circles appeared, scattered across a 50-kilometer radius around the NATO facility. But I need help, real help. Technical expertise that I don't have, people who know the local infrastructure and can move fast. Harker turned towards the workstations, made a decision that would probably be questioned later but felt inevitable in the moment. Who here has experience with server architecture and data recovery? 3 hands went up. Get over here. You're working with Lieutenant Drax for the next 30 minutes. Priority authorization from my office. Whatever she needs, you provide it. The 3 analysts moved quickly, pulling their stations closer to Harper's position, cables connecting in a rapid daisy chain that linked their computational power together and turned the workspace into something that resembled a combat operations center more than an intelligence analysis room. 2 of them were men in their 30s, competent and focused and professional. The third was younger, maybe mid-20s, and Harper recognized him immediately. He'd been on the observation deck during the demonstration, one of the soldiers who'd laughed when Kane called her princess, one of the voices in the crowd that had placed bets on how badly she'd fail. He recognized her too, his face flushed, embarrassment and shame fighting for dominance, and when he spoke, his voice cracked slightly. "Ma'am, about earlier," Harper cut him off. "What's your name?" "Specialist Chen, ma'am. Network Security Division. Can you trace physical infrastructure from IP addresses and power grid access points?" Chen blinked, recalibrated, focused on the professional question instead of the apology he'd been trying to formulate. "Yes, ma'am. That's my specialty." "Then that's all I need to know. We'll address the rest later. Right now, I need you to take these 3 locations and narrow them down to 1. 25 minutes. She transferred the data to his workstation. The facility we're looking for will have abnormal power consumption for its listed purpose, redundant cooling systems, and probably a security profile that doesn't match the building classification. Start with utility records and work backward." Chen dove into the data, his fingers flying across his keyboard with the kind of speed that came from years of practice and natural aptitude. The other 2 analysts split the remaining locations, pulling building permits and lease agreements and maintenance records, building a profile of each site and looking for anomalies that would indicate someone was using a warehouse or office building or industrial facility for purposes that didn't match the paperwork. Harper coordinated the effort, her voice quiet and steady, directing searches and cross-referencing results and building a picture of Vortex AIM's infrastructure piece by piece. Harker watched from a distance, letting her work, recognizing that this was what she'd been trained for and what she'd been doing in isolation for 4 years. Intelligence analysis at the highest level, finding patterns in noise, building cases from fragments, operating with the kind of methodical patience that separated competent analysts from exceptional ones. 12 minutes passed. Chen flagged a location. "Ma'am, I've got something. Industrial facility 8 kilometers northeast, listed as agricultural equipment storage. But the power consumption is consistent with server farms, and the cooling system specification matches high-density data center requirements. Security contract is through a subsidiary that traces back to one of the shell corporations on your list." Harper pulled up the facility data, ran it through her own filters, confirmed the pattern. "That's it. High probability target." She looked at Harker. "We need a team. Small, fast, capable of securing a potentially hostile location without destroying the equipment." Harker was already moving toward the door, pulling his phone, issuing orders that would mobilize resources and personnel and probably violate several protocols about operational authorization and advanced planning. But NATO didn't get to be NATO by following procedures when situations demanded improvisation. "I'll have a tactical team ready in 8 minutes. You're going with them." "Sir, I'm an analyst. You're the only person who knows what we're looking for and how to preserve it without triggering safeguards that might destroy the data." Harker paused at the door, looked back. "Besides, Dr. Drax, we both know you haven't been just an analyst for a very long time. Probably not since Geneva. Maybe not ever." Harper didn't argue. She turned back to her tablet, began preparing extraction protocols and containment procedures, building a checklist of exactly what needed to happen in what order to secure the Vortex AIM backup server without losing data or triggering defensive measures that Kane's partners had probably installed. Chen and the other 2 analysts continued working, pulling more detail on the facility, identifying access points and security measures and potential complications. This is how you dismantle corruption. 1 bullet, 1 algorithm, 1 truth. Share this with anyone who needs to see justice served. Part 3 is coming. Don't miss what Harper hunts next. 6 minutes later, Harper stood in the NATO motor pool watching a 6-person tactical team perform final equipment checks. They moved with efficient precision, weapons secured, body armor fitted properly, communications tested, and confirmed operational. The team leader was a woman in her 40s named Sergeant Voss, compact and muscular with the kind of competence that didn't need to announce itself. She looked at Harper's civilian clothes and lack of gear with an expression that might have been concern or might have been professional assessment. "You're coming into a potential hostile environment without armor or weapons," Voss said. Statement, not question. "I'm coming to identify and secure electronic equipment. You're handling the hostile part." Harper checked her tablet one more time, confirmed the facility location was loaded into the vehicle navigation system. "My job is to make sure we leave with what we came for. Your job is to make sure we leave." Voss nodded, apparently satisfied with the division of labor. "Rules are simple. You stay behind me. You don't touch anything until I clear it. You do exactly what I tell you the moment I tell you to do it. Understood?" "Understood." They loaded into 2 vehicles, armored SUVs that looked civilian but weren't, reinforced frames and bullet-resistant glass and engines powerful enough to get out of bad situations quickly if necessary. Harper rode in the second vehicle with Voss and 2 other team members. Nobody spoke during the 8-kilometer drive. They didn't need to. The operation was straightforward. Breach, clear, secure, extract. The complications would come from variables they couldn't predict until they were inside and dealing with whatever security measures Vortex AIM had implemented. The industrial facility sat at the edge of a commercial zone, surrounded by similar buildings that housed legitimate businesses, manufacturing, storage, distribution centers for agricultural equipment that actually was agricultural equipment. The target building looked unremarkable, 2 stories, corrugated metal siding, small parking lot with 3 vehicles present. But the security cameras were higher resolution than the surrounding buildings used, and the locks on the main entrance were military grade, and the power lines running to the structure were heavier gauge than agricultural storage would require. Voss deployed her team with hand signals, no radio chatter, 2 operators moving to the rear entrance while she and the remaining 3 approached from the front. Harper stayed close, her tablet active, running interference protocols that would prevent the security system from transmitting alerts to external monitoring stations. The lock yielded to bypass tools in under 30 seconds. The door opened on oiled hinges that made no sound. They entered. The interior matched Chen's analysis perfectly. What should have been open warehouse space was instead divided into climate-controlled rooms, each one housing server racks and cooling equipment and the kind of infrastructure that supported high-volume data storage and processing. Emergency lighting provided dim illumination, motion sensors tracked their movement, and somewhere deeper in the building an alarm began to sound. Not loud, but persistent, a warning that security had been breached and responses were being initiated. Voss moved through the space like water, smooth and fast, clearing corners and checking sight lines, her weapon tracking potential threats that didn't materialize because the facility was automated, unmanned, designed to run without human presence except for maintenance schedules that probably happened once a month. The team reached the central server room in 90 seconds. Harper moved forward, scanned the equipment layout, identified the primary storage arrays and the backup power systems, and the manual override controls that would let her shut down the wipe protocol if it hadn't already executed. She pulled a cable from her tablet, connected directly to the server management interface, began running diagnostics while Voss and her team maintained security perimeter. Code scrolled across the tablet screen. File structures appeared, data volumes calculated, encryption protocols identified and cataloged. The wipe command had executed 7 minutes ago, but it was proceeding slowly, methodically, designed to overwrite data multiple times to ensure complete destruction. Harper estimated 60% of the backup archive had already been erased. The remaining 40%, approximately 8 terabytes of files, communications, financial records, technical specifications, was still recoverable if she moved fast. She initiated a counter protocol, code she'd written specifically for this scenario, designed to freeze the wipe process and redirect surviving data to secure NATO storage. The system fought her, defensive measures activating, authentication challenges appearing that required credentials she didn't have. But Apex wasn't just ballistics AI. It was adaptive problem-solving architecture. And she'd had 4 years to teach it how to navigate security systems that thought they were impenetrable. The screen flashed green. Data began flowing, copying faster than the wipe protocol could destroy it, a race between preservation and deletion that would be decided in the next 3 minutes. Harper's breathing stayed controlled. 4-count rhythm, no panic, just focus and execution and trust in systems she'd built to handle exactly this situation. Voss spoke quietly. "We've got movement outside, 2 vehicles approaching fast." "How long do I have?" 2 minutes, maybe less." Harper's fingers moved faster, adjusting parameters, prioritizing high-value files, accepting that she wouldn't get everything but making certain she got enough. Financial records first. Following the money would expose the network. Communications second. Understanding the connections would identify the players. Technical specifications third. Proving the theft would hold up in court. Outside, vehicle doors slammed. Voices shouted in multiple languages: English, German, Russian. Commands being issued, positions being taken, people who'd been monitoring the facility remotely realizing their backup was being compromised and responding with the kind of aggression that suggested they had a lot to lose. Voss positioned her team, barricaded the entrances, called for NATO support with coordinates and situation update that would bring reinforcements in approximately 6 minutes. 6 minutes was a long time when people with weapons and motivation were trying to stop you. Harper kept working. 90 seconds left on the data transfer. The wipe protocol detected what she was doing and adapted, accelerating its destruction sequence, burning through files faster than before in a desperate attempt to eliminate evidence before it could be preserved. She countered, rerouted processing power, sacrificed speed for accuracy, ensuring that what did transfer would be intact and usable rather than corrupted fragments that might not survive legal scrutiny. Gunfire erupted outside. Not sustained combat, just warning shots, suppressing fire designed to keep Voss's team pinned while the Vortex AIM contractors, because that's what they were, private security with military training and no legal authority but plenty of firepower, established positions and prepared for breach. Voss returned fire judiciously, controlled bursts that forced the contractors to stay behind cover and bought Harper more time. 60 seconds. The tablet screen showed transfer progress in real time, percentages climbing while file counts scrolled past faster than human reading speed. 78%, 82%, 87%. The wipe protocol made one final attempt to stop the transfer, overloading the server's cooling system and triggering thermal shutdown procedures that would brick the hardware and destroy everything still stored in volatile memory. Harper had planned for that too. Emergency cooling engaged, pulling power from backup batteries, dropping server temperature fast enough to prevent cascade failure. The transfer continued. 94%, 98%, complete. She disconnected the cable, powered down her tablet, turned to Voss. "I have what we came for. We can leave." Voss nodded, issued orders through her comm system, began tactical withdrawal while maintaining cover fire that kept the contractors suppressed and cautious. They exited through the rear entrance, moved fast across open ground to the vehicles, loaded up while covering each other with practiced efficiency. Engine started. Tires spun on loose gravel. They accelerated away from the facility with contractors pursuing but not catching up, because NATO vehicles were faster and better maintained and driven by people who trained for high-speed evasion as part of their standard qualification requirements. 3 kilometers from the facility, they encountered the reinforcement convoy, 4 armored vehicles and 16 additional operators who would secure the location and arrest anyone still present. Voss passed the tactical lead to the convoy commander, continued back to headquarters with Harper and her team intact. Mission accomplished, 0 casualties, 8 terabytes of evidence secured. The ride back was quieter than the ride out, adrenaline fading, professional calm returning, people processing what had just happened and running mental after-action reviews that would become formal reports later. Harper sat in silence, tablet powered off, hands steady, breathing normal. She'd done this kind of operation before, in other contexts, in other places that weren't Geneva and weren't NATO, but required the same combination of technical expertise and operational discipline. The cover story of analyst had always been incomplete. She'd just never had reason to demonstrate exactly how incomplete until today. They arrived at headquarters 38 minutes after departing. Harker met them in the motor pool, along with legal officers and security personnel, in the beginning of what would become a massive investigation spanning multiple countries and involving dozens of agencies. Kane was already in custody, isolated in a holding facility, his access to communications cut off, his career finished, his future measured in legal proceedings and probable imprisonment. The Vortex AIM contractors who'd engaged Voss's team at the facility were being rounded up by local authorities coordinating with NATO military police. The financial networks that had funded the operation were being frozen by international banking regulators who'd received emergency requests from NATO's legal division. The consequence cascade had begun, exactly as Harper had planned for 4 years. Harker walked with her back to the war room where Chen and the other analysts had continued working, cross-referencing the data Harper had extracted with intelligence from other sources, building a comprehensive picture of just how deep the corruption ran. It was worse than Harker had suspected. Kane hadn't been working alone, and Vortex AIM wasn't the only organization that had purchased stolen NATO technology. The web extended into defense contractors, foreign intelligence services, private military corporations, venture capital groups that existed primarily to launder money, and obscure connections between criminals and politicians and businessmen who operated in the gray spaces where law became negotiable. Dismantling it would take years. Prosecutions would span continents. Some players would be arrested, others would disappear into jurisdictions that didn't honor extradition treaties. A few would probably die in convenient accidents before they could testify. But the foundation had been laid. Harper's patience had paid off. The evidence was secured. Justice would be slow, incomplete, frustrating, but it would happen. Harker stopped at the entrance to the war room, looked at Harper with an expression that mixed respect and exhaustion and something that might have been paternal pride if admirals allowed themselves that kind of sentiment. "I'm authorized to offer you a position, Chief Ballistics Engineer, full reinstatement of your former rank and clearances, salary commensurate with expertise, your choice of duty station within NATO's Research and Development Division." Harper considered the offer for exactly 3 seconds. "I decline. May I ask why?" "Because titles make targets. Because the moment I accept a position of authority, I become visible in ways that limit operational flexibility. Because I don't trust systems that allowed Kane to operate for years without detection." She paused. "I'll accept an advisory role, consulting basis, access when needed, autonomy otherwise. No permanent assignment. No chain of command beyond direct reporting to your office." Harker smiled slightly. "You want to stay in the shadows." "I want to stay effective. Those aren't always the same thing, but in this case they are." Harper pulled her tablet back out, powered it on, showed Harker a screen he hadn't seen before. Because Vortex AIM was one operation. Kane was one player. The data I extracted includes references to 6 other projects using stolen NATO technology. This doesn't end with Kane's arrest. It barely begins there. On the screen, file names scrolled past. Project Raptor, Project Meridian, Project Nightfall. Each one representing months or years of investigation, each one requiring the same patient work and careful evidence collection that had brought down Kane. Harper had spent 4 years on Apex. She could spend another 4 years, or 10 or 20, hunting the rest. Harker looked at the list, understood the implications, made his decision. Advisory role granted. Effective immediately. Report to me directly. Access level Delta 7, no permanent assignment. He extended his hand. Welcome back, Dr. Drax, for real this time. Harper shook his hand, professional and brief. Then she turned back to her workstation, pulled up the first file from Project Raptor, began reading. Chen and the other analysts moved closer, ready to assist, willing to help now that they understood who she was and what she'd accomplished and what she'd sacrificed to get here. The war room settled into working rhythm, keyboards clicking, monitors glowing, intelligence being gathered and analyzed and transformed into actionable evidence. Outside, the sun climbed toward afternoon, burning away the last shadows, illuminating everything. Harper's tablet chimed softly, a notification from a monitoring system she'd established years ago, tracking specific keywords and communication patterns across networks that most people didn't know existed. She opened it, read the contents, felt something cold settle in her chest. One of the contractors from the Vortex AIM facility had sent a message before being apprehended. 4 words. Vortex Server 27, still active. There was another backup, somewhere else, protected by different systems, monitored by different people, containing data she hadn't recovered because she hadn't known it existed. Kane's operation had been larger than she'd mapped, the conspiracy deeper than she'd calculated. 4 years of work, and she'd only captured the visible portion. The rest remained hidden, active, dangerous. Harker saw her expression change, moved closer. Problem? Harper showed him the message, watched his face tighten, watched him process the implications, that this wasn't over, wouldn't be over for a long time, possibly years, possibly never completely. That Harper's patient investigation had scored a victory, but not a conclusion. That the war she'd been fighting in isolation was about to become a campaign that would require resources and personnel and institutional commitment that NATO would have to decide whether to provide. He read the message twice, then looked at Harper directly. Can you find it? Given time and access, yes. How much time? Depends on how careful they were. Weeks, maybe months. Harker nodded slowly, making calculations about budget and authority and how to sell this to people who controlled resources and demanded results measured in quarterly reports and annual reviews. Then he made his decision, the same way he'd made every important decision in 30 years of service, by trusting the people who'd proven themselves competent and hoping the consequences would justify the gamble. You have whatever you need, blank check authorization, build your team, find the server, bring them down. He paused. One war ends, another begins. Harper nodded. She closed the message, archived it, pulled up clean workspace on her tablet. Already planning, already calculating, already hunting. Because justice wasn't loud, justice was patient. And Harper Drax had learned patience better than anyone. She picked up the brass casing from her 2,000-meter shot, evidence bagged and logged but returned to her by an analyst who understood symbolism. With a precision engraving tool, she carved 4 letters into the copper surface. APX Delta. The war room continued working around her. The investigation proceeded. The machinery of justice ground forward, slow and inexorable and incomplete but real. And somewhere in the distance, in a facility she hadn't found yet, Vortex Server 27 continued operating, storing secrets, supporting operations that would eventually need to be dismantled one careful step at a time. Harper set the brass casing on her desk where she could see it. A reminder, a promise, a declaration that the princess they'd mocked had built the weapon that found them, and wasn't finished hunting. The princess they mocked built the weapon that found them.
Every soldier carry a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to MVB Story for more.